Hey guys, if you were born a baby in the heart of ancient Persia, somewhere between the cracked sand of Yazd and the brick-lined alleys of Susa, you probably wouldn't survive your first week unless someone, somewhere, had figured out a way to stop your milk from going sour by the time the sun hit its second hour in the sky. You'd squint your tiny, blinking eyes under a canopy of endless blue sky, the kind that never shows a single cloud, and you'd wiggle your arms inside tight cloth wrappings, confused as to why the air seems to shimmer like it's made of liquid fire. The truth is, you were born into heat, not the pleasant warmth of a summer picnic. No, this is the kind of heat that bakes bricks just by sitting still. And that, dear listener, is why your entire existence from the moment of birth revolves around one question. How do you keep things cold when the universe seems determined to melt you? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And as always, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You come into this world somewhere around the year 400 BCE, in a low-walled village surrounded by beige dust and sun-baked fields. Your home is built from adobe and cooled only by thick walls and a few clever air holes. You're born tiny, perhaps just under 3 kilos, wrapped in tightly bound cotton linens to keep your limbs from flailing and to calm your little body, which already knows that the world outside your mother's arms is a harsh and parched place. Your mother, who has cheeks weathered from years of wind and sun, and arms strong from kneading flour into thin rounds of bread, doesn't have a cradle for you. Instead, she places you in a shallow clay bowl, padded with palm fibers and sheep's wool. The fibers scratch a little, and the wool smells faintly of salt and dust. But at least the bowl stays cool, especially if someone remembers to pour a little water underneath it now and then. Your father, tall, quiet, and with perpetually cracked heels, is not around for your birth. He's up in the hills, trying to gather snow with other men from the village. They've built a wooden cart and padded it with layers of straw, trying to protect their precious cargo from the wrath of the desert sun. Snow in your world is not a seasonal inconvenience. It's a godsend, a miracle, a soft white treasure that melts away if you so much as breathe too hard. And it's this treasure that, even before you've learned to speak, will determine whether you grow up drinking sour goat milk or sipping something only slightly less warm than bathwater. As a newborn, you're already in the hands of an entire system of preservation. Your mother will boil water and pour it into wide-mouthed ceramic pots that have been coated in a special mixture. Some whisper of lime, others of ash. And once cooled, she'll ladle it into smaller, narrow-necked jugs, which are stored in a recessed corner of your one-room home. These pots aren't just containers. They're rudimentary refrigerators. The porous clay allows water to seep through and evaporate on the surface, pulling heat from the contents inside. You don't know the science of it, of course. All you know is that when the milk comes from that particular jug, you don't cry quite as much. The house itself tries its best to shield you. The walls are made from mud bricks mixed with chopped straw, sturdy, thick, and surprisingly insulating. There's a single slit of a window, high above the ground, to let in a ribbon of light, but not the full force of the sun. Your roof is flat, used mostly for drying herbs and escaping the heat at night. And occasionally, when the air becomes especially unbearable, your mother opens a wooden shutter high up on one wall, one of those clever little architectural tricks passed down from her grandfather's time, designed to catch the wind and funnel it through the room in a gentle draft. That, in case you didn't realize it, is your first encounter with a badger, the Persian windcatcher. But even with all this ingenuity, the truth is that you sweat constantly. Your tiny body clings to your mother's chest, your skin warm and flushed, your hair damp. The heat presses on you like a heavy quilt made of stone, unrelenting and still. There's no escaping it. So your mother swaddles you tighter, not looser, because tighter means less surface area. And less surface area means less loss of precious body moisture. She fans you with palm leaves dipped in water. She wipes your forehead with a damp cloth that smells faintly of mint and old clay. And she hums a tune that might be about the moon or might be about camels. Frankly, even she's not sure anymore. Outside, the world is ablaze. The chickens dig shallow holes to lie in cooler soil. The goats bleat in protest. Even the cat slinks into a shadow and does nothing but blink, slow, and unimpressed. But inside your clay and straw shelter, a battle rages. Not between people, but between sun and shadow, heat and evaporation, decay and preservation. And you, little one, are the reluctant prize. By the time you're a few weeks old, you've already witnessed your first ice block. It's not what you'd expect. There's no gleaming, clear surface, just a lump of cloudy, half-melted crystal, wrapped in burlap and stored in the deepest part of the community Yakchal, that mysterious domed structure half buried in the ground outside the village. You don't understand its shape or why the air around it feels 10 degrees cooler, or why everyone lowers their voices when they approach it. But you recognize the sensation, the delightful sting of cool air on your cheeks, the way your little fists unclench for a moment, as if your muscles themselves are sighing in relief. One day, your uncle lifts you and holds you near the Yakchal's entrance. He whispers something to your mother about the child needing to absorb the cold into his bones. Or maybe he's just teasing her, as uncles often do. Either way, the coolness stays with you. You fall asleep more easily that night, as if your body remembers the gentle contrast between fire and frost, between what is and what could be. And thus begins your life, not just as a child of Persia, but as a child of coolness. You will never know an electric fan or the hum of a refrigerator, but you will know the strange silence of cold clay, the hollow echo of dripping water, the hushed reverence people use when they speak of things that do not melt. You spend your earliest days cradled in a clay bowl, lined with camel hair and dreams of breeze that never quite arrives before midday. And before you've even managed to sit up on your own, your nourishment comes from a mixture of tepid goat milk and mashed dates, all of it stored in glazed jugs, placed in shadowed corners of your one-room home, whose walls exhale the heat they absorbed from the sun hours after sunset. The jugs themselves seem alive, sweating gently in the dry air, their sides slick with condensation drawn from within. And even though you can't form words yet, your body seems to understand instinctively that this milk, not spoiled yet, is a minor miracle in a land where everything left unattended becomes hot, then sour, then ruined. Your first real memories are not of people, but of texture. The grainy cool of baked mud under your bare legs, the slippery glaze on a water jug's mouth, the prickling feel of sand in your clothing, always sand, no matter how tightly your mother wraps your robes, and no matter how carefully she dusts your bed before lying you down to sleep. There is no escaping it, nor the heat, nor the dryness that turns even your small tongue into parchment by midday. You learn very young to treasure the sensation of water, not just in your mouth, but on your skin, and to recognize the slow drip-drip of cooling jars as a sound more precious than music. And though you don't know the word yet, you're already beginning to understand the principle of evaporation. It's not science, not yet. It's survival. The large amphora in the corner of the room, half buried in a shallow pit of sand and covered with a damp cloth, is where your mother places everything she wants to stay edible for more than an hour. Milk, barley gruel, leftover lamb, once even a broken comb that she insisted needed to be cooled back into shape. Whatever that means, the adults in your world speak often of cooling, though not with any reference to temperature scales or thermodynamics. They simply talk of things needing rest, needing shade, needing to breathe through the clay, as if the pots themselves had lungs. By your third year, you are old enough to toddle barefoot across the village courtyard, your little feet quick to learn which tiles remain cooler than others, those in shadow, those near water, those recently swept with a damp broom of date palm fibers. You follow your cousins in their zigzag pattern of movement, darting from shadow to shade to water jar, laughing only when you make it to the next refuge without burning the soles of your feet. You don't realize it yet, but you're learning a dance choreographed by generations, the delicate rhythm of living with heat, not against it. Sometimes you stop beside the water pots just to listen, not to drink, not to touch, but to hear. The steady, nearly inaudible tick of water escaping through porous clay is like a heartbeat, one that reminds you there is still coolness inside, still a defense against the creeping warmth. And the grown-ups reinforce this reverence. When your aunt finds you pressing your ear against the jug, she nods solemnly, as if you've passed a test of wisdom, then tells you about the time her grandmother hid pomegranate seeds inside such a jar and found them still crisp 3 days later. Soon enough, you become old enough to fetch water yourself. And that means learning how to carry a jug without spilling, without warming the contents too quickly with your own hands, and without tripping over the ever-present goats who seem to have no fear of collision. Your uncle shows you the trick. Wrap the handle in a strip of damp cloth to insulate it. Cradle the jug close to your belly like a baby, and walk slowly, almost reverently. Because this is not just water. It is time, preserved. You also begin to notice the conversations that happen between adults when the weather takes an unusual turn. A surprise breeze from the west sparks a round of speculation. Will the humidity rise? Will the pots still breathe correctly? Your grandfather, who claims to have once met a man who could smell spoilage a day in advance, grumbles about the changing patterns, then wanders off muttering about cracks in the clay and whether this batch of jars was fired too quickly. You watch him examine them one by one, tapping their sides with a knuckle, listening for some secret code in the echoes. You think he's just being dramatic, but then you hear the thinnest of cracks, a hairline fracture along the curve of one jar, and he declares it retired, as if the vessel had served valiantly and now deserves rest. The food you eat during this time, barley cooked into paste, yogurt soured in sun-warmed bowls, apricots dried into chewy strips, is all part of the same quiet war against decay. Every meal in your home is accompanied by a whispered calculation. How long has it been since this was cooled? Was the jar left too close to the window? Did someone forget to replace the damp cloth on top? You learn early that a careless moment means ruin. And so, even as a child, you begin to treat your clay jars with more care than your toys. One afternoon, after a dust storm sweeps through, your father invites you to help him clean and inspect the family's store of cooling jars. The storm has left them caked in grit, their necks filled with fine sand, their surfaces too dry to function properly. You're handed a bundle of rags, and together you wipe them down, then carry water in small cups to rehydrate the outer surfaces. As you work, he tells you that the clay must always stay slightly moist, not soaked, not dry, just like your skin, he says, except more useful. You laugh, but the lesson sticks. Then comes the first time you break one. It happens on a hot morning, the kind where everything seems heavier than usual. You're carrying a smaller jug, a new one, gifted to your mother by a visiting aunt, and your fingers are slick with sweat. You try to adjust your grip, but the clay slips, tumbles, and shatters on the stone floor. The sound is sharp, final. Your mother doesn't yell. She just sighs, kneels, and begins picking up the pieces, whispering something under her breath that you can't quite hear. She doesn't blame you, but she does make you sit beside her as she mixes more clay and shapes a replacement. She says nothing for a long time, until finally, even the best pots break. What matters is what you do after. The lesson, like the cooling, seeps in slowly, and by the time you reach your 6th year, you've already memorized which jars cool best in which corners of the house, which walls retain morning shade the longest, and which combinations of sand and straw produce clay that breathes just enough, but not too much. You don't know what refrigeration means, but you understand its spirit. In your world, preservation is not a device you plug into the wall. It's a relationship, a ritual, a form of domestic worship. So when someone mentions that the village plans to build another yakchal soon, your ears perk up. You've seen one once from a distance, a strange domed shape rising from the earth like a snail's shell, partially buried and partly looming. You don't know how it works yet, but something about it pulls at you. The same way the clay jars do, the same way the sound of dripping water makes your chest feel calm. Whatever lives in that dome, you think, must know how to keep the world from melting. By the time your legs grow stronger and your steps lose the wobble of early childhood, you begin to understand that in your village, movement is dictated not by destination, but by temperature. Wherever the sun is least aggressive, that's where people gather. And you learn to read the shifting slivers of shade like a map handed down through generations, passing beneath pergolas made of reeds, crouching near courtyard walls that still hold the night's coolness in their cracks, curling up under fig trees that drop sweet fruit, and better yet, blessed patches of trembling shadow. The day stretches slowly, punctuated by a rhythm not of clocks, but of glances toward the sun's position, the way its light snakes across tiles and walls, and finally recedes with a sigh in the late afternoon, when everyone seems to breathe a little easier, speak a little louder, and move with less reluctance. Your tasks grow with your limbs, and so one morning, your uncle hands you a small woven basket and instructs you to follow him into the deeper part of the family compound, where dates are laid out to dry, and clay pots wait patiently in narrow alcoves carved into the earth itself. Here, he tells you, is where the real cooling happens, not the everyday jars that sit by your sleeping mat, but the larger vessels, the ones half buried in sand and insulated with layers of straw and soot, and even in some cases, old scraps of goat hide for extra effect. You run your hand along one and recoil slightly. The outer shell is damp and cold to the touch, almost like the belly of a sleeping lizard. A surprise in a world where most things are dry and hot and rough. It drinks the air, your uncle says, not elaborating, and then moves on to adjust the position of another jar, shifting it slightly so its opening no longer catches the mid-morning glare. These moments are your first hints that your family has a system for dealing with the sun's tyranny, a system far older than you, older than your parents, maybe even older than the village itself. And it's not just the jars or the earth hollows. They rely on clever placement, damp cloths refreshed hourly, the wisdom of building thick walls with high windows to let in air but not heat. Your grandfather, who still rises before the call to prayer, spends each dawn dragging wet sand across the threshold of the storage room, his hands spotted with age but unwavering in their routine. To keep the floor cool, he mutters, as if that alone will keep the food from spoiling, the milk from turning, the dates from shriveling before their time. You're expected to help, of course, even if you're not always sure what you're doing. Sometimes you're sent to collect broken pots, ones that cracked from too much sun or too little moisture, and deliver them to the potter's son, who grinds them into shards and uses them as filler in new mixtures. Nothing cools like something that remembers being hot, the boy tells you once, nodding sagely while stirring a bucket of reddish slurry with his bare foot. You stare, unconvinced, but store the phrase away. Adults often speak in riddles, and in this heat, riddles are easier to carry than explanations. When the winds pick up, carrying dry whispers from the desert, everything in the village changes. People tie scarves around their faces, water is rationed more strictly, and the clay jars are tended with the reverence of livestock. You're told to wet the cloths more often, to monitor the cracks for signs of overdrying, to make sure the shadows fall correctly through the latticework above the central courtyard. If you're careless, if you let a jug dry out completely, or forget to rotate one to face away from the wind, you might lose more than your family's trust. You might lose an entire day's ration of food or water, spoiled by the invisible hand of heat. On one particularly scorching afternoon, you discover a new trick entirely by accident. After spilling a bucket of water near the food storage pit, you watch in fascination as the ground drinks it greedily, darkening, cooling, releasing a faint chill that climbs your legs like mist. Curious, you place your hand on the patch and find it almost pleasant. You report this to your mother, who nods and says, "Yes." Water and sand speak quietly to each other. She then sends you back to mop it up properly, but you walk away, feeling like you've uncovered a secret alliance between the elements. Your own room is little more than a carved nook, its ceiling low, and its walls thick with layered mud and straw. Yet even here the heat finds you by midday. You begin hanging your clothes damp from a crossbeam, so that the rising warmth might cool slightly as it brushes against the evaporating fabric. At first, this earns you scolding from your aunt, who dislikes the smell. But later she tries it herself and pretends not to have learned it from you. By age 7, you begin to associate the different times of day, not with specific chores, but with specific temperatures. Early morning is when the clay feels cool and eager to help. Late morning is when everything begins to resist you. Water evaporates faster, jars sweat more, cloths dry out in minutes. Noon is almost sacred in its hostility. That's when all activity pauses, conversations become whispers, and even birds fall silent, their beaks slightly open, wings limp. Late afternoon brings relief, only if you've planned well. If the jars were wetted in time, if the food was placed deep enough in the sand hollows, if no one forgot to shade the water pot by the door. You start dreaming about shade, long, uninterrupted corridors of it, endless rooftops strung with damp cloths, vast underground halls lined with cold jars, and sweet, unspoiled fruit. Once, after a particularly hot day, you dream of walking into a room where every surface is made of cold clay and water drips from the ceiling like rain. You wake up smiling, then groan when you realize your bedding is damp, not from dew, but from your own sweat. Still, you persist. The reward for your diligence comes one day when your mother allows you to taste a cup of sour yogurt that's been cooled in the oldest pot in the house. A thick, rounded vessel wrapped in straw rope and placed near the lowest point of the kitchen floor. The yogurt is tangy and cold enough to make your teeth ache slightly, and you grin, gasping, eyes wide. That's what the old ways taste like, your mother says, ruffling your hair. You start asking questions about these old ways, and the answers come slowly, sometimes reluctantly. Your elders speak not of inventions, but of inheritances. The cooling jars, the underground hollows, the damp cloths and shade dances. None of it is seen as innovation. It's tradition. It's how things have always been. No one person is credited. No single story explains it all. The clay knew before we did, your grandfather says, and that's supposed to be enough. But still, you wonder, who first thought to mold a pot so porous it could breathe? Who figured out that dampening it would cool its contents. Was it trial and error? Was it desperation? Was it something they learned from watching birds fan their eggs or ants dig their tunnels? You imagine a nameless ancestor crouched beside a fire, holding a cracked pot and watching condensation form where none had before. You picture their excitement, the slow spread of understanding, the cautious experimentation that must have followed. Then the moment when someone realized this could save not just food, but lives. And though you are just a child, you feel connected to that unnamed potter, that dusty pioneer. You feel your hands echoing their movements when you rinse the jars each morning, when you pat the cloths into place, when you press your face to the cool rim of the vessel and whisper a quiet thank you. Because in a world where the sun burns everything it touches, your little village has found a way to breathe back. You wake just before dawn, not because anyone calls you, but because the walls of your mud brick house remember the cool of the night, and their whisper against your skin stirs something instinctual, a signal that if you want to be useful today, you'd best rise while the ground is still kind. The world outside your mat is pale blue and lavender in the half-light, and the courtyard stones are not yet angry underfoot. You step lightly, passing sleeping goats and stacked baskets of unground wheat, until you reach the far side of the house where a peculiar chimney juts out. Not one that smokes, but one that listens. This is your home's wind catcher, or badger, a structure that reaches toward the sky with confidence, as though it has something to prove. At first glance, it looks like a square tower with slatted openings, too narrow for anyone to climb, too open to be of much use. And yet, as you stand beneath it, a soft current of air brushes your forehead, and you feel the telltale kiss of moving wind. It isn't cold, not exactly, but in a place where the breeze is a currency of its own. Even a nudge of air is a kind of wealth. Your father has told you about these things, though he never explains much all at once. The wind catcher divides the air, he said one evening while mending his sandals. Some it sends down, some it pushes out, and all of it keeps us from baking in our own thoughts. You weren't entirely sure what he meant, but now, as you look up at the slats, you imagine the structure acting like a great throat, swallowing the sky's breath and burping it gently into the heart of your home. The inside of your room is still dark, save for a square of dust-mottled light creeping in through the high ventilation slot. You run your fingers across the floor, feeling for dampness. Last night, your mother poured water on the earth to coax coolness from the soil. It worked. The clay is still soft, a little moist like the underside of a mushroom cap. You breathe deeply, smelling wet earth, straw, and something tangy from the kitchen corner. Probably yesterday's yogurt jar doing its slow dance between edible and questionable. The house is built with purpose, though no one boasts about it. The walls are thick, not because people love sturdiness, but because they trap the nighttime chill, a gift the morning sun has not yet stolen. There are no glass windows, only carved niches high on the walls that let in air but not heat, angled to avoid direct light, as if the sun is an unruly guest who cannot be trusted to stay in the sitting room. Your grandmother says the builders of your home knew what they were doing. She doesn't remember their names, but she remembers their choices. You've begun to notice how everything in your world is built to slow things down. The stairs curve, forcing a gentler ascent. The doors are low, so people must duck and bow as they enter. Whether from respect or poor posture is unclear. Even the roof has a slight tilt, not for water runoff, but to guide the wind more agreeably. And the ceilings, oh, the ceilings. They are curved like the underside of a pot, meant to cradle sound and hold in the cool like a secret. You climb to the roof, barefoot and careful. Up here, things look different. The flat rooftops of your neighbors form a puzzle of tan and gray, interrupted occasionally by bundles of drying herbs or squawking chickens exiled from their coops. You sit beside the base of the windcatcher, feeling its gentle breath exhaling down onto your back, and watch the sun rise over the distant hills. Already, the shadows are retreating, and you know that by midday, this quiet perch will be too hot to sit on without hissing like a cat. Your cousin once tried to explain the science of the bad gear to you, using words like air pressure and thermal inversion. But you preferred your grandmother's version, that the wind is a guest who visits those who build him a proper room. Either way, the result is the same. Air that moves when it should not. Coolness where none should exist. It feels like magic, or perhaps like an ancient trick passed along in silence. Later that morning, you're given a new task, sweeping dust from the base of the windshaft. You do so gently, watching as bits of straw, feathers, and some kind of ancient beetle leg are coaxed out from the corner. You're careful not to disturb the opening where the air breathes down. It's oddly reverent work. You're not just cleaning, you're maintaining the relationship between house and wind. If you get it wrong, the air might grow sluggish, and your mother might start muttering about headaches again. After the sweeping, you're asked to help seal one of the small floor vents for the day. This is done by placing a flat tile over the hole and weighting it with a brick. We'll open it again at night, your father says, barely looking up from his weaving. You nod, feeling like a minor priest in a temple to coolness, tending to rituals no one fully explains, but everyone depends on. By midday, the courtyard blazes. The air hums. You retreat inside, drawn toward the inner room where the air feels like it's been dipped in shade and wrung out. The badger is doing its work, whispering streams of air down through its angled shafts, dividing the heat from the motion, giving you something like relief. You press your face to the floor, feeling where it is dampest, and smile. Outside, people fan themselves and complain. Inside, your house holds on to its secrets with clay-stained hands. That evening, your grandmother shares a story. She says that once, long ago, a king's palace was built with wind catchers so powerful that they could chill pomegranate wine even in summer. You doubt this, but you want to believe. She says the palace had 3 towers, each facing a different direction, and they caught the wind like sails on a boat, channeling it through underground tunnels lined with polished stone. The walls sweated cold, she says, and servants wore cloaks indoors to avoid shivering. You ask what happened to this palace. She shrugs. Too much cleverness, she says, and not enough humility. Still, you dream about it that night. A place where cold air flows like river water, where people sip chilled honey milk beside flickering lamps, where even the floors seem to breathe. In the days that follow, you begin to understand that the badger is not just an ornament or a relic. It is alive in its own quiet way. It listens to the air, shifts with the breeze, and sometimes moans in the night like a low flute. You start noticing which rooms catch more of its breath, where the corners collect the most chill. You reposition sleeping mats accordingly. You learn how to angle the clay shutters. You develop preferences. One evening, as a joke, you lean your face into the windcatcher's base and whisper, "Thank you." To your surprise, a gust brushes your cheek, stronger than usual, as if the tower heard you and replied. You don't tell anyone, not because you fear mockery, but because some things are better kept between a child and the air itself. By now, the sound has become part of you. Barely noticed yet, always there. Humming behind the chatter of the market. Soft beneath the thud of goat hooves across packed earth. Quieter even than the rustle of reeds outside your window. It is the sound of water, not gushing or babbling, like in the tales of distant rivers, but dripping, a deliberate, almost shy rhythm that echoes faintly in the corner of your mind. And though no one makes a fuss about it, you begin to realize that this persistent plink is the heartbeat of your household's survival. You're seated on the ground, one hot afternoon, fanning yourself with a sheet of palm fiber and wondering whether it's possible to melt without anyone noticing. When your mother gestures for you to help her refill the cooling jars in the storage alcove, she hands you a clay jug and leads you toward a shaded side room, low-ceilinged and silent, where the air feels as though it forgot to warm up that day. In the corner, nestled in a hollow, lined with pebbles and ash, stand several unglazed clay pots. Wide-bellied, narrow-necked, and slightly damp to the touch. You've seen them many times, of course. Everyone in the village uses these porous jars to cool water or milk, or to keep apricots from turning into unfortunate science experiments. But today, your mother shows you how they truly work. She kneels beside one, runs a damp cloth gently over its side, and taps it softly. A faint hollow tone responds, as if the pot has been waiting to speak. "This one is breathing well," she says. You blink. "Breathing?" She nods, matter of fact. The water seeps through, little by little, evaporates, that steals heat. So the inside stays cool, even when the air forgets to be kind. You peer closer, placing your hand just above the curved surface. And sure enough, it's cooler than the wall beside it. Cooler than the air. Cooler even than your own patience. The clay is unglazed for a reason, she explains. It needs to sweat. Moisture filters through the microscopic pores, beads along the outside, and vanishes into the dry air, pulling warmth away as it goes. It's not fast. It's not dramatic. But it works. You watch as she uncorks one of the jars, revealing a pool of water inside, dim and clear, like a forgotten memory. She dips a ladle, pours it into your jug, and you notice how the surface ripples, almost lazily, disturbed but not alarmed. When you sip from it later, tentatively, then greedily, it is not cold in the way snow is cold, but cool enough to awaken your tongue, cool enough to make you blink and wonder why more people aren't singing songs about clay. Over the next few weeks, you're given more responsibility. Checking the jars, wiping away grit, ensuring the lids fit tightly enough to keep out insects, but not so tightly that the airflow stops. You begin to learn the subtle language of storage, how some things prefer dryness, while others beg for moisture, how dates wrinkle less when placed above a damp bowl, how garlic, if left too close to the cooling jars, starts whispering its presence to every other item in the room. You also learn that beneath the jars is a system of trenches, shallow channels dug by your father long ago, filled with soft sand and pebbles that guide excess moisture away from the storage pit. Sometimes you crouch near the entrance to the storage alcove, chin on your knees, and watch droplets form on the outside of the jars, trickle downward, and vanish into the thirsty floor. It's mesmerizing, like watching time drip itself into the earth. One afternoon, while chasing a runaway plum, you accidentally knock over one of the older jars. It tips, wobbles, and shatters with a dull gasp against the floor. Everyone hears. You freeze. But instead of scolding, your grandmother kneels beside the shards and begins sorting them calmly, murmuring, "It's time this one returned to the soil." That night, she lets you help mold a new pot. The clay is mixed in a wide basin behind the house, stirred with bare feet and sprinkled with bits of straw. You squish your toes through it, laughing despite yourself, while she describes how each jar must have just the right thickness. Too thin, and it leaks too fast. Too thick, and it suffocates. When it's shaped and left to dry in the shade, you feel an odd sense of pride, as though you're helping the household breathe. The rhythm of dripping water becomes a companion. You begin to notice how the sound changes depending on the time of day. Sharper at noon, slower near dawn, hesitant during sandstorms. Once, during a dry spell, the jars fall silent for a full afternoon, and the stillness feels so loud you can't help but sit beside them and whisper, "Where do you go?" Your cousin laughs at you, but later, you catch her doing the same. As seasons pass, your family uses these jars, not just for water, but for clever preservation experiments. One uncle stores eggs in sand inside a half-buried pot, checking them weekly for any signs of rebellion. Your aunt hangs cheese, wrapped in linen, near the cool jars and swears it ages better than anything sold in the capital. And always, there's the dried fruit, apricots, figs, and slices of quince, softened just enough by proximity to the jars that they seem plumper than their sun-dried cousins. Your grandmother tells a tale, not entirely credible, of a traveler who once buried a jar of pomegranate juice beneath the sand near a riverbank and returned months later to find it turned into something tangy, dangerous, and forbidden by the mullahs. She winks. You pretend not to laugh. There are other tricks too. You learn how to double-layer pots for extra insulation, placing a smaller jar inside a slightly larger one, with wet sand between them. The setup, while not exactly elegant, keeps milk fresh enough that your younger siblings stop complaining during breakfast. You even hear of richer families who suspend entire meats in cooled pits lined with these jars, preserving lamb well past the season when everyone else has switched to lentils and memories. But your favorite, without question, is the smell of the storage room at night. When everyone else is asleep, you sometimes sneak in just to sit. The mingled scent of damp clay, dried mint, crushed coriander, and something faintly sweet, like honey dust, wraps around you like a memory of better weather. You press your back to the wall, feel its faint chills seep into your spine, and listen. The dripping has slowed to a hush now, a single drop every few minutes. It feels like the house is exhaling. Sometimes you wonder if the clay itself remembers. If it holds echoes of all the whispered arguments, all the quiet laughter, all the babies rocked to sleep nearby. You run your fingers over the surface of the jars and imagine them humming with memories, their breath a bridge between seasons, their silence a kind of wisdom. No one calls this refrigeration, of course. That's a word from some distant century you haven't met yet. But you know what it means to preserve, to protect, to cool, not with wires and humming boxes, but with mud, patience, and just enough airflow to keep life from curdling. And as you drift to sleep that night, the air faintly scented with clay and lemon leaves, you think, maybe the old ways aren't slow. They're just kind. You're older now. Perhaps not quite old enough to be called helpful, but certainly tall enough to carry a full jar of goat milk without spilling it every time. And curious enough to be trusted with questions that no one bothers to answer, unless asked with quiet determination. And so, one morning, when the sun has barely pulled itself above the horizon, and the shadow of the village walls still stretch long and lazy across the dust, your father takes you by the hand and says, "Today, you'll see the yakchal. You've heard whispers of it, of course. Soft conversations around firelight, murmured instructions for those traveling to the far edge of the village, passing references to the cold house or that old dome beyond the orchard. But never has anyone described it fully. Not because it's a secret, but because its strangeness is best experienced, not told. And so, you follow your father through quiet alleys, still smelling of sleep, past the goat pens and the vendor stalls, beyond the last cluster of acacia trees, where the air becomes dry in a different way, less like heat, more like breath held in. It appears slowly at first, just the peak of a dome rising from the earth, like a slumbering creature, buried nose first in sand. Then as you walk closer, its full form takes shape, a massive conical structure of pale mud brick, sloping steeply upward like a forgotten mountain made by hands. It is not beautiful in the way palaces are, nor is it adorned with tiles or carvings like the village mosque. It is plain, stern, and quiet, like the clay jars in your cellar, only much, much bigger. Your father pauses at the entrance, a small archway carved low into one side of the dome, and ducks inside, without a word. You follow, blinking as your eyes adjust to the dimness, and the temperature drops almost immediately. Not dramatically, not like a snowstorm crashing into your spine, but subtly, like stepping into the memory of coolness. Inside, your footsteps echo softly. The air is still and hushed, smelling of old earth and something faintly metallic. The floor slopes gently downward, leading into a hollow chamber below ground, deeper and wider than you expected. Your voice, when you whisper, returns in layers, once from the walls, then again from the ceiling, as if the dome likes to think before answering. And there, at the heart of the pit, lies the ice. A sheet of it, thin and matte, stretches across a shallow basin, dug into the floor. Around it, stacked blocks of firmer, older ice gleam faintly in the filtered sunlight, slipping through a narrow shaft in the roof. Your father kneels beside the basin, rests a hand on the rim, and exhales. "It slept all summer," he says. "You don't understand how it got there. Not yet. It hasn't snowed in your village in your lifetime, and the nearest mountains seem like fables." But your father begins to explain, slowly, as if reading aloud from a book no one else can see. Snow comes from the north, packed in straw, hauled in by men with big shoulders and louder curses. He begins. They arrive in spring, when the desert still thinks about being kind, and we lower the snow into the pit before it melts in their hands. Then we wait. You imagine a caravan of strangers arriving with donkeys, sagging under bundles of straw, their hooves crunching over thawing footprints, their noses red from frost. You picture strong arms passing blocks of snow down into this strange, sunken cave, then covering it again in straw, like tucking in a sleeping child with hay-scented blankets. And then your father shows you the vent system. Long, narrow tunnels dug beneath the Yakchal, leading toward prevailing winds that sweep in cool air during the night and funnel it into the underground chamber. He pulls aside a flat stone near the wall, revealing a narrow shaft lined with smooth, dark clay. "It breathes," he says, "but only at night." You crouch beside it, listening, and though the wind is still for now, you swear the tunnel exhales. A faint draft brushes your cheeks, cooler than the dome around you, colder than anything else you've known in this dry world. He calls it a bajir, a windcatcher, designed to scoop up cold air and trap it in the pit below. Some say they copied the idea from Egyptian tomb vents. Others insist it came from divine inspiration. Your father just shrugs. It works. There are stories. There are always stories that the original builders of this Yakchal were not ordinary villagers, but a guild of ice sages, desert mystics with knowledge passed from camel caravan to caravan, men and women who studied how breath travels through brick and how to turn heat into forgetfulness. One elder even claims a distant ancestor of hers once heard the dome speak, warning them to move the snow before sunrise. That elder is not widely trusted with goats, but you can't help believing her. Just a little. Over the following weeks, you are permitted to return. Not alone, not yet, but always with a task. Check the humidity, inspect the drain channels at the base, brush loose sand from the ramp leading down into the basin. You begin to understand that this structure is not a building in the ordinary sense. It is a system, a body, a lung that exhales cold, a memory vault that forgets heat. You watch as workers smear new layers of saruj, a special plaster made from clay, sand, egg whites, ash, and goat hair, onto the inner walls. It smells terrible while wet, but once dried, it becomes almost waterproof. Your father lets you mix a batch one day, and you gag while stirring, but feel oddly proud when your handful of paste is smeared across the Yakchal wall and hardens into permanence. On one particularly windy evening, your father points out something strange. The top of the dome has a small opening, and sometimes, when the air is just right, the wind whistles softly through it, circulating upward from the lower chamber. It takes the warm breath out, he says, and leaves the cold in. You imagine the Yakchal sighing, its breath lifting into the stars, its ribs made of brick, its heart buried beneath your feet. Not everything makes sense yet. You still don't quite understand how snow keeps from melting in the middle of the desert. Your cousin insists it's because of thermal inertia, a phrase he learned from an old trader and repeats as if it makes him a wizard. Another boy insists there's secret salt mixed in the base to lower the temperature. Or maybe, someone suggests, it's just stubborn, and maybe it is. Maybe the Yakchal doesn't want to melt. Years from now, when the world changes and new inventions arrive, iceboxes, electric wires, humming refrigerators, you will still remember this place. You will remember the first time you touched ancient ice in a land of fire. You will remember your father's hands coated in sarouge and the low thrum of cool air sneaking up your sleeves. You will remember how it felt to step into a dome that breathes, to learn that even in a place where the sun rules like a tyrant, you can carve out a pocket of resistance, a quiet coolness that endures not through force, but through cleverness and clay. But for now, you simply sit near the basin, your knees drawn up, your fingers tracing circles in the straw. You exhale slowly, and the air condenses briefly, just enough to make you smile. The Yakchal breathes, and you, finally, are learning to breathe with it. The first time you see ice in the middle of summer, it doesn't quite register as possible. You're seated near the mouth of the dome again, rubbing dust from your knees after brushing straw out of the way for your uncle, who's been unusually quiet all morning. He's not normally the silent type. He's the kind of man who narrates the progress of a meal as he eats it, critiques the speed of donkeys out loud, and mutters complaints about his sandals, whether they fit or not. But today he simply says, "Watch." He disappears into the belly of the Yakchal with an empty basket, straw-stuffed and slightly damp from use. You crouch near the slope, feeling the cool breath rising up again, and wait, tracing circles with your finger in the fine powdery dust. Then, after what feels like the length of a long prayer but shorter than a nap, he reemerges, basket in hand, now full, and your eyes widen before you even know why. The basket steams faintly in the warmth of the day. Not boiling steam, but the delicate, lazy mist of cold surrendering slowly to heat. And nestled within the straw are glimmering, imperfect blocks of ice, dulled around the edges, but still very much intact. Their surfaces sweating under the sun, like shy guests at a wedding. You blink. It is the month of Tur. The sun has not let up for 3 weeks. The gourds are shedding in panic. The water jugs on the windowsill need to be turned 3 times a day, just to stay tepid. And yet here, in the crook of your uncle's arm, lies something that should have vanished moons ago. An impossible solid in a land ruled by melt. "Take one," he says. You hesitate, of course. You've heard the tales, how holding ice for too long burns worse than fire, how it can steal your voice or freeze your thoughts. But curiosity wins. You reach for it. It bites your fingers gently at first, then more sharply, until you almost drop it. But you don't. You hold it up like a crystal, staring through its cloudy body toward the light, and watch it cry a single, perfect tear. Your uncle laughs. Not witchcraft, he says, before you can ask. Just balance. And so begins your next lesson. Not just about ice, but about the uneasy truce ancient Persians brokered with nature. A quiet diplomacy between fire and frost. You learn that storing snow is only part of the miracle. The other half is preserving it, guarding it through the most brutal heat with nothing but mud, wind, and shadows. There are rituals, of course. No one calls them that, not out loud, but you notice the patterns. When the snow arrives from the Zagros Mountains, dragged on the backs of mules and wrapped in thick straw insulation, there is always a procession of sorts. Not grand, not formal, just careful. The youngest lead the way with bundles of herbs to scatter along the path. Not for protection, they say, but to mask the scent of sweetness from curious animals. The elders follow, murmuring quiet calculations. Your uncle, always near the front, carries the heavy, sealed baskets with 2 hands, his lips pressed into the line he only wears when carrying something precious. The yakchal opens for them like a mouth, and one by one, the baskets descend. You're allowed to peer over the edge, but not enter yet. The straw is peeled back gently, layer by layer, and the ice blocks, though reduced in size from the journey, are still cold enough to sting your cheek when you lean too close. Each block is laid at the base, packed tight, stacked like pages in an invisible book. Then more straw, then ash. Then at last, the lid, an enormous disk of woven reeds slathered with clay that seals the pit like a drumskin. Sometimes the snow doesn't make it. Heatwave caravans arrive with only slush to show for days of travel. Sometimes the ice fractures on the descent, a careless drop, turning miracle into puddle. And sometimes, worst of all, the straw turns damp in storage. The layers sink, and the melting spreads silently in the dark, until the ice is more memory than matter. Your uncle grieves each loss like a friend, but when it works beautifully. That summer, you become an unofficial assistant, toting straw, checking vents, watching the shadows creep along the walls to mark the safest hours for descent. You learn that coolness isn't passive. It has to be courted, coaxed, kept. Warmth rushes in the moment you let your guard down, so you don't. You grow attuned to temperature, the way birds sense wind shifts, and the community treats the ice like treasure. It's not for every throat. It's rationed for sickness, for celebration, for moments when the body needs convincing that the world can still be kind. Once, when the midwife's son burns his foot on a cooking stone, a wedge of ice is brought to him wrapped in fig leaves, and he clutches it like a secret. Another time, a visiting poet is allowed to sip cooled pomegranate juice, just once, and promptly writes 5 verses about it. There's a joke that ice is the one thing in the village that makes both babies and grown men cry. You hear it often. You laugh every time, but not everything about it is laughter. There are debates, always debates. Should the community invest in a second yakchal? What if someone from the next village sneaks in and steals? Who owns the cold? Can cold be owned? One scholar, visiting from the city, insists that future generations will have machines to make ice at will. By fire, he says, with a smug look. Imagine that. Ice from fire. No one believes him. The current Yakchal remains communal, though your uncle is quietly its guardian. He checks the wind catchers at dusk, seals cracks with fresh paste, adjusts the vent baffles according to moon phase, not because it helps, necessarily, but because tradition says it does. When he walks past, children whisper, "Ice Keeper," half in jest, half in awe. One day, as you sit beside him at the top of the slope, watching light dance over the dome's surface, he says, "The cold is clever. It hides. You must be cleverer to keep it." You don't answer. You're chewing on a seed, listening to the wind sigh through the tunnel below. Later that week, a man from the river settlement visits, asking for a sliver of ice for his elderly mother. She hasn't eaten in days, he says. Your uncle considers the request, then nods slowly. A shard is retrieved, wrapped in mint leaves and linen, and passed across palms, like a holy object. The man leaves with tears in his beard. That night, your uncle tells you the secret. The Yakchal is a kind of lie. It tricks heat, he whispers. It tells the sun, "There's nothing to see here." You smile at the idea of tricking the sun, and in your heart, you begin to think. Perhaps one day, you will be the one who keeps the ice from vanishing. Not with machines, not with spells, but with straw, silence, and an unspoken pact with the wind. You rise early the next morning, your breath still warm against the chill that clings stubbornly to the stone floors before sunrise. And with an awkward bundle of tools tied together with old rope, you follow your cousin Davud, he of the long legs and even longer explanations, as he winds through narrow alleyways and past courtyards, still asleep beneath sleeping goats and shuttered lattice windows, toward the edge of the village, where the earth, long ago, decided it wanted to keep secrets of its own. And it's there, with the early light bouncing softly off the dust and the clay, that you first learn what lies beneath, where the air stops humming and starts murmuring instead. Quieter, deeper, ancient. Your cousin, chewing on a fig leaf like it's a philosophical prop, gestures to the patch of ground you're supposed to dig. "Here," he says, as though it's obvious. "This one breathes better." You don't understand what he means yet. Breathing earth is the kind of phrase that belongs in bedtime tales, or the wild gesturing of your poetry teacher, who claims the sand sings on Wednesdays. But Davud isn't poetic. He's practical. And when he jams his spade into the sun-baked ground, it isn't just dirt that yields. It's history, cracking open like a clay pot left too long in fire. You dig. It's slow work. The clay fights back in places, resisting the intrusion like a cat disturbed from sleep. But beneath the surface, layers of earth soften, cool, and crumble. You reach stone, old brick, and then a hollow. Air escapes in a sigh. Cool air. Not ice cold, but cold enough to make the hairs on your arm rise in confusion and delight. Davud grins, peering into the dark, like a boy trying to catch a ghost with bare hands. "That's a kanat," he says. The word is unfamiliar, but satisfying in the mouth. Kanat. An underground tunnel that snakes its way from distant mountain springs, delivering water to your dry doorstep with no fanfare, no flame, no metal, Just gravity, clay, and the logic of desperate genius. And this particular tunnel? A lifeline. It passes below the edge of the village and weaves its way not just to the fields, but to the Yakchal itself, feeding the dome's belly with air so dry, so quietly cool, that even fire doesn't bother to chase it. Davud explains that the wind catchers, the tall vertical shafts crowned with slats, pull hot air upward, while the kanat below pulls cooler air inward. Together, they form a gentle circulation, not unlike the movement of breath in a sleeping chest, slow and rhythmic. The dome stays cool because of this dance, this subterranean whispering between air and stone, old as any prayer you've ever heard. You help clear sediment from the mouth of the tunnel, crouching low to scoop out the debris that time has kindly deposited there. Occasionally, something odd emerges. An old clay bead, a coin eaten nearly flat, a smooth fragment of painted tile that once might have lined a bathhouse. These you pocket quietly, as children do, to be shown later or never at all. Then comes the moment you're trusted with a task more delicate, measuring the draft. It's not done with instruments, of course. Those are for court scientists and the vizier's men. Here you learn by tongue, by wrist, by the tickle at the back of the neck. You hold a fig leaf to the mouth of the tunnel and watch. If it flutters, the draft is strong. If it quivers, decent. If it sags sadly, then it's time to dig deeper or adjust the vents above. You and Davud spend the better part of the day chasing airflow, like monks chasing enlightenment. You crawl into half-collapsed vents, squint up at the sun through tiny shafts, and argue about whether a gust is northern enough to qualify for summer capture. Villagers pass by occasionally and shake their heads at you both. Children giggle. Old women click their tongues. But no one stops you. Everyone knows that when the Yakchal breathes well, the whole village sleeps better. By late afternoon, when your stomach growls louder than the wind, Davud pulls out a handful of salted apricots and declares the job mostly done. You sit together beside the shaded wall of the dome, chewing in contented silence, the breeze from the tunnel washing your toes with its slow, invisible sigh. And you think, not for the first time, that maybe the ground does breathe after all. The next day, your uncle adds a new instruction to your growing list of Yakchal duties. Keep the underground channels clear. He shows you the tunnel blueprints, not drawn with ink, but sketched with a stick in dust on the floor of your courtyard, like a message to the gods. Here is the kanat, he says, dragging his finger in a winding curve. Here, the mouth to the dome. Here, a backup tunnel. The map blows away 10 minutes later in a gust of wind, but the image remains in your mind for years. Sometimes the wind doesn't cooperate. Some weeks it's too strong, drying everything out too quickly and bringing heat instead of relief. Other times, it dies entirely, and the dome sweats like a trapped animal. On these days, you climb to the top of the Yakchal with Davud and adjust the vents manually, turning slats like musicians tuning a string instrument, hoping the song will play itself properly. On the rare occasion you hear someone from the city describe such mechanisms as primitive, you scoff, not out loud, but inwardly, the way people do when someone insults something they don't understand. Because this isn't primitive. This is balance. This is architecture that listens. This is the quiet brilliance of people who learn to command cold without noise, without burning, without begging the skies for miracles. And you, in your youth, and your sweat-stained shirt, are now part of that tradition. When you walk the village paths at night, the dome glows faintly behind you, a silent guardian with secrets stored beneath. And though you know only a handful of words in the courtier's tongue and have never seen a machine more complex than a pulley, you feel in your bones the weight of the knowledge you carry. Knowledge that the ground, the wind, the shape of things can be shaped in return with patience and quiet hands. You're older now, or at least you walk with a little more certainty and a little less wondering whether you'll fall into a goat pit or be bitten by a scorpion while gathering figs. The Yakchal has become more than a mystery to you. It's a duty, a quiet guardian whose cold breath hums under your feet and whispers through the vents when you walk by. But there's still one part of it that seems like wizardry, like something the elders whisper about, but never fully explain. And today, finally, you're allowed to witness it. The sacred recipe for making its skin. Not your own skin, though honestly, that's probably less complex. No, this is the making of saruj, the water-repelling, heat-fighting, mud-colored material that coats the inside of the Yakchal dome and lines its belly so that ice doesn't just sit there and melt out of boredom. The elders gather in the courtyard, the morning sun already hot enough to toast sesame seeds on the brick wall. And you're told to bring the buckets, 5 of them, mismatched and full of strange ingredients that could either make a storage vault or kill a small army, depending on how they're combined. There's clay, of course. Not just any clay, but a fine, pale, silty type that crumbles easily when dry and smells faintly metallic when wet. There's lime, chalky and dangerous to inhale, which makes your nose itch and your cousin Dawood sneeze dramatically. Then comes ash, the soft grey powder left from last winter's fires, carried in sacks that leak as you walk, leaving trails like lazy ghosts. The last 2 ingredients are stranger. One is goat hair, coarse and wiry, collected from the spring shearing and cleaned by hand over hours of gossip and song. The other, yes, this is real, is egg whites, beaten to a sticky froth that turns your stomach just a little when it's slopped into the mix. The mixture is called saruj, and it's a strange cousin of concrete, but instead of being born of steel and smoke, it's made from fire, animal, and dust. You watch as the elders mix it slowly in a great pit lined with stone, taking turns with wide paddles that stir the whole thing like it's a sour soup for a very large and patient demon. The proportions aren't written down. They live in the crooked fingers of old men and the murmured measurements of wives who never went to school but know more about chemistry than the vizier's top scribe. And when it's finally done, thick, grayish, a little shiny like wet parchment, you get to do what you've secretly dreamed of since you were a child, hiding behind fig trees. You climb into the dome itself. Inside, it's cool, even in summer, and it smells of minerals, an old air like a tomb that only dreams of being opened. You can't see the sky anymore, only the soft curve of the ceiling, sloping like the inside of a seashell. Voices echo weirdly. Footsteps don't sound right. The yakshal is quiet, but not silent. It breathes, just as Dawood once told you, and you can feel it in your skin. That faint pressure of air, moving downward, brushing past your cheeks as you stand at the base of 1,000-year idea, and you begin to coat the walls. It's not glamorous work. You smear the saruj by hand at first, then use wide, flexible blades of goat bone or bent palm wood to smooth it into shape. The inner surface of the dome ripples faintly, where the mixture settles into the old curves and cracks. It takes hours, days, and it must be done in layers. One coat must dry, then another is added, and again, until the inside of the structure feels like the inside of a cool, dusty egg, hardened against the assault of time, heat, and the occasional curious lizard. One elder, old Musa, who claims he once stored a whole winter's worth of fish in a yakchal and didn't lose a single scale, tells you that the goat hair in the mixture isn't just filler. It's memory. It helps bind the layers, gives the surface a resilience that lime alone can't provide. And the egg whites, they're the secret. They create a slight sheen, a water-repellent barrier that even the wettest snow melt can't fully seep into. You think it sounds made up, honestly? Like something someone invented to justify cracking open 3 dozen eggs before breakfast. But then you touch the wall a week later, and it's dry. Bone dry. Not just dry, it feels like it wants to stay dry. Like it actively resists moisture, the way a cat resists being bathed. And that's when you understand. The dome isn't just a shell. It's a living machine, built entirely from things your ancestors could gather with bare hands, from bones, fires, rivers, and dust, assembled with stubborn patience and the kind of knowledge you can't write down because it isn't in words. It's in practice, in the calluses on your palms, in the quiet repetition of scraping and smoothing, in the jokes the workers make as they lean against the yakchal's shadow and sip slightly sour goat milk under the noonday sun. The final stage of saruj application involves polishing, not with cloths or tools, but with stones, smooth stones. You rub them in slow, even circles across the surface, compacting it, encouraging the particles to settle into each other, like a family that's grown old together and no longer bothers to argue. It's meditative, soothing. You find yourself forgetting the hours, the day, the taste of your lunch. You only remember the cold, because it is cold. Even when the sun outside is merciless and the birds squabble in dry trees, inside the dome, the temperature clings to a comforting hum. It's not icebox cold, not snowball in your hand cold, but it's enough to keep melons fresh, enough to dry fish, enough to hold ice for weeks beneath layers of straw and shadow. And all of it begins, not with wind, not with snow, but with mud, reinforced with hair and eggs and patience. Later that evening, as you sit in your courtyard, with saruj dust still clinging to your wrists, your aunt brings you a slice of chilled melon pulled from the storage pit earlier that day. It's crisp, damp, and impossibly sweet, as though the cold had taught the fruit how to whisper. You chew slowly. You think about the wall you helped build. You wonder if, centuries from now, someone else will rub that same wall and feel your handprint in the way the surface dips ever so slightly, right where you leaned too hard while daydreaming. And you smile, not a proud smile, just a quiet one, because you've joined the lineage now. Not of warriors, not of kings, but of those who knew how to keep a thing cold, even in a world that never stops warming. You don't often travel far from the village, but when you do, it's always for something important, and nothing, absolutely nothing, is more important to your people than the annual snow caravan. It begins each year after the winter solstice, when the wind sharpens and the crows fall quiet, and your uncle, the same wiry man who once scared you by pretending to hear whispers in the yakchal, begins to pack bundles of straw as if he's preparing for battle. But this isn't war. It's logistics. Cold logistics. Very cold logistics. You're told to wake before dawn. And as you do, you feel it first in your toes. The brittle silence of the air. The kind of quiet that comes only when the world is coated in frost. The men are already outside, their voices muffled by wool wraps, and the steam of their breath rising like smoke from miniature chimneys. The donkeys are sleepy and displeased, but they know this route well. It is their annual pilgrimage to the white-capped Zagros Mountains, a name that still sounds like a song you're not yet allowed to sing. You walk with them, but not all the way. Your legs aren't quite strong enough. And besides, someone has to help prepare the receiving pit back home. Still, the idea of it thrills you. That somewhere beyond these flat plains and sandy dunes, up where the earth touches the sky, there is snow. Not just the dry, crusty flakes that sometimes fall and disappear by breakfast, but real snow. Deep snow. Packable snow. Snow that you can carry in bundles, wrapped in straw and coated in oilcloth to keep the sun out and the chill in. You wait nearly a week. Each evening you stare at the empty yakchal pit, its wide mouth gaping like it's waiting to be fed, and wonder if the snow is still intact, if it even made it down the mountainside, or if your uncle slipped and fell into a ravine. His last words being something like, "At least the donkey's insulated." But then finally, they return. The caravan limps into the village, looking like it crawled out of the belly of winter itself. Men coated in frost and dust, animals with frozen lashes, a few ropes snapped by wind or sheer stubbornness. But most importantly, in the center of the procession, bundles. Huge ones. Packed tightly, stacked like oversized loaves of bread. Only heavier, colder, and more valuable than anything short of gold. Your job is simple but sacred. Remove the outer straw without letting the ice touch your skin. Even in winter, direct contact is dangerous. It shocks you, bites you. You yelp the first time and are gently laughed at. It's a rite of passage. Everyone yelps at least once. The snow inside the bundles isn't snow anymore. It's pressed into chunks, thick and crunchy, with bits of pine needle and gravel still embedded. Souvenirs from the mountaintop. These chunks are then carefully lowered into the pit of the yakchal, where earlier you helped lay down the first bed of straw. The layering begins. Snow, straw, snow, straw. Like building a cold sandwich for a sleeping desert. It isn't just storage. It's performance. The elders watch like priests overseeing a ceremony. The air inside the yakchal chills palpably as the snow settles in. You can feel it in your teeth. that soft, aching cold, not unpleasant, but reminding you that nature still has the upper hand. Later that day, as you sit chewing roasted barley and warming your hands near a slow fire, your uncle finally speaks about the journey. Not in grand tales, but in details. The sound of boots crunching on ice, the moment the sun hit a ridge and melted part of the road. The way the snow changed color depending on the altitude. He tells you they passed another caravan, headed for a different village, and traded dates for salted goat. Snow, it seems, is the only currency heavier than silver. And then he shares the odd part, the bit that makes you blink. We passed a snow burial, he says, almost offhandedly. A place where a boy, long ago, got lost in a storm. They never found his body, just his pack, perfectly preserved. Like he'd only stopped to nap. You swallow hard. You imagine that, flesh frozen, cheeks still flushed, snow sealing time like Saruj seals the dome. The desert kills loudly. The mountain kills in silence. And yet, your people return to it every year, chasing cold because heat never leaves you anything fresh. This thought lingers as you walk back to the Yakchal that evening. The dome is different now, heavier, quieter, like it knows its belly is full again. You press your ear to the outer wall and swear you hear a hum. Or maybe it's your own blood, or the memory of frost. The next morning, something rare happens. Your aunt, who never fusses about food beyond eat it while it's not spoiled, hands you a sliver of preserved apricot chilled on the top layer of ice. It is somehow sweeter, brighter, more alive than anything you've eaten in weeks. You let it melt on your tongue, the cold stinging then fading, and you understand. Refrigeration is not a luxury in your world. It's survival, a way to stretch harvests, preserve meat, cool tempers, and soothe bodies under fever. And every bite of melon in summer, every drink of chilled vinegar, every seed stored until next season, it all begins here, with the madness of dragging snow through desert and building domes that breathe. Your uncle catches you staring at the Yakchal again, and he grins without looking up. It's not magic, he says, but you're not so sure. You rise a little earlier now, not because anyone forces you, but because something in the silence before sunrise feels different once the Yakchal is full. There's a weight in the air, not heavy, but expectant, like the dome itself is holding its breath alongside you. You've grown used to the cold it radiates, the steady way it breathes through its subterranean throat. But now you're beginning to understand that it isn't just a place for storing ice. It's a calendar, a clock, a slow, murmuring instrument, measuring time, not in seconds or minutes, but in melting and settling and subtle shifts in temperature that most people don't notice unless they've lived beside one for years. And you're starting to notice. This morning, your task is to check the meltwater channels, the small clay troughs and baked brick ducts that run like little arteries beneath the dome, spiraling gently downward, guiding whatever meltwater forms away from the base of the ice and into collection cisterns. These cisterns aren't glamorous. They're little more than sunken pots in the ground, often covered with cracked lids and bits of goat skin to keep dust out. But they matter, because every drop of water saved is one less the well must provide. You crouch beside one of the troughs and gently lift the stone covering. The air that rises smells faintly of minerals and yesterday's breeze. You dip 2 fingers in, still cold, still clean. That's good. The ice hasn't shifted too quickly, and the saruj lining is holding strong, keeping the inside dry, except for controlled melt. You sit there for a moment, watching as a small bead of water slides its way along the channel's curve, wobbles slightly, then disappears into the collection pot, like it's slipping out of view on purpose. Your uncle once told you that if the water didn't flow, the ice would rebel. You didn't understand it at the time. You thought it was one of his many dramatic exaggerations. But now you know. Water trapped beneath ice will destabilize it. It'll melt the bottom layer, shift the weight, cause collapse. That's why the drainage system is as important as the dome itself. It's why ancient engineers, those long-forgotten Persian dreamers, spent just as much time planning what to do with melt as with storage. You walk along the channel, following its path as it leads away from the dome's base and disappears under a patch of reeds behind the date palms. Here, the water collects in a small reservoir used for irrigating kitchen herbs. It's a little thing, only a few clay walls and a wooden spout. But it means that even in the driest month, the mint and garlic survive. The older women swear the cold runoff makes the herbs sharper, more fragrant. You're not so sure, but you believe them anyway. Later that day, the heat rises like a slow exhale from the stones, and you return to the dome's side for shade. You lean your back against its surface and close your eyes. Not to sleep, just to listen. And you swear you can hear it again, that deep murmur, as if the ice below is whispering old tales. You wonder what it would say if it could talk. Maybe nothing wise. Maybe just the same thing over and over. Hold still, hold cold, hold still, hold cold. It's strange because you've grown up thinking of heat as the constant enemy. Heat spoils food, dries your tongue, cracks the walls of your home, makes tempers short and dreams uncomfortable. But here, with your back pressed against ancient saruj and a thin veil of cold breathing through your spine, you realize something. Heat is only the enemy if you don't know how to speak to it. The yakchal is not an escape from heat. It's a negotiation, a peace treaty, a cold answer to a hot question. You think back to a story your aunt told you once while pickling turnips. That there was a time, generations ago, when a young couple tried to build a yakchal without the proper slope for drainage. They filled it with ice anyway. By midsummer, the base had flooded, the dome cracked, and a whole season's work was lost. The family had to rely on dried figs and salt meat for months. To this day, no one in the village dares to build even a storage shed without asking which way the water will run. You smile at the memory. You imagine the ghost of that broken dome still sighing into the sand somewhere, muttering about fools and poor drainage. The rest of your afternoon is spent sweeping the interior edge of the dome. Not because it needs cleaning, but because it's tradition. The dome must be walked, touched, tended. A yakchol that is ignored will forget how to keep cold, or so they say. You don't believe that exactly, but you do notice how different the dome feels when people are inside it, walking quietly, tracing the curves of its belly with their fingers, murmuring little thanks. It's less a building and more a relative. A grandparent who can't speak, but who always offers you something when you visit. When the sun begins to set, you watch the last light hit the dome's peak and slide off like liquid bronze. The dome changes color in the evening, soft cream to blushing amber, then to cool gray. You sit on a nearby step and let your feet rest in the shadow. A breeze picks up. You close your eyes. For a moment, you imagine what this spot looked like 100 years ago, or 500. The same dome, different children, different straw, but the same need, the same answer. Later, your younger cousin asks you, innocently, because that's how younger cousins ask everything. Is it true? The Yakchal never forgets who touches it. You pause. You look at the dome. You think about the way the wall curves slightly at the spot where you always lean. How the channel bends just a little where you once tripped and cracked a stone. How the surface feels warmer in that spot where your uncle rests each noon. Yes, you say, I think it remembers everything. And that night, when the stars are out and the dome's shadow is long and cool, you dream of walking inside it again. But this time, the floor is not clay. It's ice, clear, smooth and glowing faintly. And beneath your feet are footsteps, dozens, maybe hundreds. Yours among them, footsteps the ice never let go. It begins with a whisper, the kind that slips through tiny cracks in walls and into dreams. And before you even open your eyes, you already know that something has changed. The air smells different. Not cleaner exactly, but charged, like the atmosphere before a desert storm. You sit up slowly on your mat, rubbing grit from your eyes. And that's when you hear it again. A soft tapping, like the patter of 1,000 small fingers drumming lightly on the dome above. Rain, which is odd, because it never rains this time of year. You step outside, and sure enough, the sky is iron gray and sighing. A few fat drops spatter the ground and then vanish into the dust, leaving behind dark circles like smudges from invisible ink. The elders are already out, blinking up at the clouds, as if unsure whether to be grateful or alarmed. Your mother mutters something about unexpected blessings, and your uncle, as usual, adds a comment that's either wise or completely useless. Rain doesn't ask for permission. It just shows up. You smile, but your feet move faster. Instincts humming now, because rain means one thing to you more than any other. Flood. And floods mean danger for the Yakchal. You run towards the dome without thinking, sandals slapping wet earth, heart pounding not from panic, but urgency. The cold store is built to withstand a lot. It has stood, after all, for generations, but it was never meant to drink from the sky. Its breath flows down and out, not up and in. If rainwater seeps in through the top vent or, worse, pools around the foundation, it can compromise the insulation layer, melt the lower strata of ice, and turn the precious stored snow into a slush of failure. When you reach the dome, you circle it quickly. The ground around it is still dry in places, but rivulets are starting to form. You kneel and run your fingers over the saruj at the base. Still cool, still firm. But you don't trust it. You grab a long reed broom and begin sweeping small channels outward, forming a kind of emergency moat to divert the water. Other hands join you, Your cousin, a neighbor, even an old woman who hasn't moved faster than a tortoise in years. No one says anything. They don't have to. This is sacred work. You're not saving a structure. You're protecting memory, preserving winter, defending that quiet cold that lets apricots ripen in summer and lets fevered children press their heads against damp cloths while the mothers whisper blessings. As the rain intensifies, your uncle arrives with a bundle of cloth tarps and a long pole. Together, you cover the vent at the top, not sealing it, but shading it, draping the fabric like a cautious hat over the dome's crown. It flaps softly in the wind, a trembling crown for a king that doesn't speak. Beneath your feet, the ground turns soft. A frog leaps from nowhere, startling you into a half laugh, half yelp. Your cousin swears it winked. You glance up, and for a moment, the world feels suspended between two moods. Clouds that don't quite decide if they want to cry or clear. People frozen in half-action, and that hum from the Akchol. Deeper now, almost like a sigh. You step inside briefly, not to check the ice, but to listen. To stand in the breath of cold and remind yourself what's at stake. It's still cool, still silent. The snow hasn't shifted. Yet, back outside, the village is quiet again. The worst of the rain passes, leaving behind a silvery slickness on stones and the faint smell of wet clay. Children begin poking their heads out, testing puddles with cautious toes. You exhale, the danger's past. But that night, you can't sleep, because even though the rain is gone, you keep seeing that slow seepage in your mind. Water finding cracks, time finding weakness. The truth is, nothing lasts forever, not even cold. Even the most beautiful dome will someday crumble. Even the most sacred structure needs care, not once but always. The next morning, you decide to do something that no one really told you to do, but which feels right. You gather a bundle of charcoal, a flat stone, and a piece of parchment. You sit near the entrance of the yakchal and begin to write. Not a poem, not a prayer, just a list of what the dome holds, of how it feels, of who touched it this year, of how the rain came and didn't win. It's a kind of diary, though no one will call it that. You roll it up and tuck it into a clay pot, seal it with wax, and place it gently near the inner wall, away from the ice, but close enough that maybe, just maybe, the cold will keep it long after your fingers forget how to write. You don't tell anyone, but you smile a little every time you pass that spot, because now the dome remembers more than just footsteps and straw. It remembers you. You wake to the rustle of movement outside your window, a shuffling of feet, low murmurs, the scratch of a palm broom against packed earth. It's barely dawn, the sky still pale with sleep, but the village is already stirring, because today is one of those rare, oddly celebrated, gently dreaded days. Inspection Day. Not by any government official or tax collector. Those come and go with headaches and paperwork. But by the oldest man still breathing, the keeper of old knowledge, the memory in human form who remembers the last time the dome cracked and blames it on a goat sneezing too close to the vent. His name is Dariush, and no one dares call him anything else. He walks like a branch about to break and speaks like sand spilling from a cracked jar. But his memory is terrifying. He can recite the order in which every brick was laid in the dome's western wall, tell you how many scorpions he's removed from the vent chute since 1947, and will absolutely notice if you swept the wrong direction across the floor. That happened once. The culprit still flinches at the sight of a broom. You tidy yourself with quick fingers, splash water over your face from the clay basin, and pull on a fresh tunic that doesn't smell like goat. Then you head straight to the dome, heart doing that gentle thump of someone who hasn't done anything wrong, but still feels like they're about to be interrogated. When you arrive, he's already there, perched like a lopsided hawk on a short stool, hands folded atop a cane that's probably older than you, eyes half closed, but tracking everything. He nods when he sees you, an almost imperceptible dip of the chin. But that's more than enough. That's approval. That's a medal. You stand a little straighter. The inspection begins. He circles the dome counterclockwise, because clockwise is considered disrespectful to the frieze, whatever that means. He taps the outer sarouj with his cane, listens to the sound, grunts. He sniffs the air near the vent, declares it acceptable. He reaches down and touches the base of the dome, not with reverence, but with the frankness of someone checking a camel's teeth. And then comes the part you've been both waiting for and dreading. He wants to see the inside. The old woman who tends the latch opens the door with both hands, like a priestess at a tomb. The air that rolls out is crisp and sharp, like mint cracked over snow. You all file in, feet quiet on the floor, breath fogging gently, and wait for him to move. He does eventually, one step, then another. He walks the spiral with slow precision, pausing at each junction of the wall, leaning in to inspect the bricks, the slope, the feel of the cold. His fingers trace the cracks, some intentional, some old and sealed, one or two still whispering danger. He makes no comment yet. You do not breathe loudly. Then he asks the one question everyone expects and no one knows how to answer. Did you speak to it? There's a pause. You, feeling bold, raise your hand slightly and nod. He turns, looks at you fully now. There's something fierce in his eyes, like a flame that hasn't gone out, just tucked itself behind layers of smoke. What did it say? You swallow. It said, hold still, hold cold. A breathless moment, and then, miraculously, he laughs. A dry, brittle cackle that bounces around the inside of the dome like startled bats. Good, he says. It remembers its name. After that, the tension melts like morning frost. He praises the evenness of the floor, the shape of the meltwater channel, the faint trace of herbs stored along the northern wall. He does not mention the small crack near the base. He saw it, you're sure of that. But perhaps he has chosen mercy today. Once outside, he claps you gently on the shoulder. You feel it in your bones for hours. And then, like a breeze that was never quite there to begin with, he disappears back into his home at the edge of the date grove, where he will probably spend the next several hours sharpening a quill with unnerving intensity or arguing with a pigeon. You sit beside the dome after he's gone, knees drawn up, watching the way the light climbs slowly up the plaster. There's a satisfaction in the stillness now, like the building itself is breathing easier. You reach into your sleeve and pull out the list you've been keeping. The private record of little things, temperature changes, odd dreams you had inside, what the frost smelled like on Thursday. You consider starting a second scroll, because there's something about today that feels like a chapter break. Even if the story keeps going, as the sun lifts higher and shadows shrink, you lie back on the warm earth and stare at the sky, which is brilliantly empty now. No hint of rain or omen. You wonder how long these domes will last. How long before someone forgets how to make sarouj, or decides ice is no longer worth the trouble. But that thought passes like a bird overhead, acknowledged, then gone. Because today, the dome still stands, and it remembers its name. You never expect the pigeon to come back, but there it is again. 3 mornings in a row now, perched precisely on the small, sun-warmed ledge just above the dome's southern vent, cooing like it owns the place, head bobbing in slow, contemplative rhythm, as if it's deep in conversation with the building itself. You glance up at it while hauling a basket of straw, squinting in the rising light, and feel a strange twinge of recognition, as if the bird knows something about you it shouldn't. Your aunt thinks it's a sign of fortune. Your little cousin insists it's a reincarnated poet. Your uncle, of course, mumbles something about guano and bad omens, but even he pauses now before shooing it off, because somehow the pigeon keeps choosing the same spot, the same time, as though keeping an appointment older than anyone remembers. Today, though, you're more focused on what's happening beneath the bird's perch. You've noticed a thin, white trace trailing from the southern edge of the dome down into the earth. Not water, not salt, but a whisper of condensation, curling like a breath against the clay. It only appears in the early morning and vanishes by mid-morning, as if shy. At first you thought it might be a crack, but it isn't spreading. You touch it. It's cold, very cold, which of course sparks a theory. And once you have a theory, you have to test it. You wait for everyone to head off to the midday meal, then sneak back with a thin reed, a piece of string and a bell. The idea is absurd, sure, but curiosity has already laced your boots and sent you walking. You feed the reed into the vent, slowly, gently, listening for resistance. The string trails behind, and at the end of the string, the bell waits, ready to tinkle if the air current is strong enough to shift it. You hold your breath, and then, faint but unmistakable, the bell trembles. It doesn't ring exactly, but vibrates like something far below is humming, moving. You pull the reed back out, heart quickening now. You remember an old story Dariush once mumbled half asleep at a fire, about how the cold in a well-tended yakchal doesn't just sit there. It travels, sliding along invisible currents like a cautious animal. What if this cold has found a shortcut? What if this condensation line is a sign of subterranean airflow? You don't tell anyone just yet. Not until you're sure. But that evening, while everyone else prepares tea and flattens bread against hot stones, you start sketching a map in the dirt. A childish attempt at architecture, perhaps, but with honest intent. You trace where the dome stands, where the vent leads, where the white line crawls, and where the pigeon waits. You mark spots where the ground feels colder, where dew forms earlier. You are, it turns out, not the first. Your aunt walks past, glances down, and nods approvingly. Your grandfather once tried the same thing. He said the yakchal was like a sleeping beast. You had to learn its breathing patterns. That night, you can't sleep. Not because of heat or noise, but because your brain is buzzing, full of lines and airflow and the strange, thrilling idea that maybe the dome is alive. Not in the way people are, but in the way trees are. Quietly processing, reacting, remembering. In the morning, you return with a bowl of ash and a sieve. This too is a test. You climb to the dome's crown, the vent now uncovered for summer flow, and sprinkle the ash gently into the opening. A slow stream, dark and weightless, descends into the void. You wait. 5 minutes. 10. Then you circle the base, and there by the southern edge, right where the condensation line curls, tiny specks of ash, not blown there by wind. Lifted, your heart leaps in your chest. There is a channel, a current. The dome breathes through the earth. You want to tell everyone immediately. To shout it from the vent, to declare yourself the cold whisperer, or maybe just the ashmaster. But instead, you go and find Dariush. He listens, quietly. Then he nods once and says, "Write it down." So you do. You return to your scroll. Add a new line, this one bolder than the rest. The yakchal exhales through the soil. The breath of cold is quiet, but real. And you place that scroll, sealed with wax, tied with twine, into another clay jar. This one new and unmarked, and you label it not with your name, but with a symbol, a curled line, like a sleeping snake, like a breeze, because someday someone will find it, and they'll know the dome still breathes, and maybe, just maybe, they'll listen to it too. The summer heat is beginning to settle into that stubborn, stretched-out mood where even the shadows feel heavy, and every step leaves a print on the baked ground, not just from your feet, but from the weight of your intentions, your tasks, your overly ambitious morning plans that quickly wilt by midday. You trudge along the path with a pail of cracked dates meant for syrup boiling, but you keep glancing sideways at the dome, not because anything is wrong, but because everything is somehow precisely right. And that's suspicious. You've spent so much time around the yakchal lately that it's starting to imprint on your daily rhythm. You know exactly when the coldest breath of air leaks from the vent just before sunrise, and how long it takes for the scent of buried ice to shift from metallic to earthy. You can tell, from a glance at the saruj wall, whether someone forgot to rinse their hands before touching it, and now you find yourself developing a strange fondness for the dome's soft groaning sounds, those long, slow creaks that happen when it contracts or relaxes depending on the temperature gradient between day and night. You're not alone in this. There's a quiet club of yakchal watchers. Not formal, of course. This isn't a society with robes and secret handshakes, but rather a loosely connected network of people who, for one reason or another, spend a little too much time near domes. There's the baker's daughter, who swears she can smell changes in the underground air and uses it to time her loaves. The calligrapher, who copies poems about frost and tapes them to the dome's outer ring when no one's looking. Even the shepherd, who once claimed he saw his goat bow to the yakchal. Though this may say more about the goat than the dome, one of the oldest of these dome watchers is Pari, who moves like dust on a breeze and never speaks louder than a whisper. She was a girl when the last dome was cracked by an earthquake, an event she describes not in terms of destruction, but grief. It cried, she once told you. It wept from every seam. So when she beckons you over one sweltering morning, waving a thin reed fan and standing beside the eastern wall like a guardian, you know it's important. She places your hand on the wall. Not the vent, not the floor. The wall. Feel, she says. At first, it's just warm stone, the same texture you've felt 1,000 times. But as your palm settles, you feel something else. A faint thrum, barely there, like a low note held deep beneath the surface. It isn't sound. It's presence. As if the wall itself remembers something and is humming quietly to itself about it. Pari nods, satisfied. She explains, in a soft, unhurried way, that the yakchal is more than its function. It isn't just a structure built to hold ice. It's a repository of memory, of habit, of carefully trained airflow and thermal layering. It remembers being cold, she says. That memory is what keeps it cold. You ask if that's true. She raises an eyebrow. Doesn't matter, it works. Later that day, inspired, or maybe just overtired from the sun, you begin experimenting. You place small bowls of scented herbs inside the dome, near the base. You note how each scent behaves over time. The mint tightens, sharpens, contracts. The lavender turns heavy, slow, like syrup in winter. You place a sliver of copper on the floor and record how long it takes to frost. You sketch your findings like a child, mimicking scholars. But there's a sincerity to it that you can't deny. Eventually, you decide to sleep inside the dome, not just rest, fully sleep. Blankets, mat, pillow, scroll tucked under your head, like a scholar's stone. You enter just after sunset, when the last of the heat is leaving the air. Inside, the silence wraps around you instantly. Not emptiness, but a silence full of gentle weight, like snow before dawn. The walls breathe out a soft chill, and you settle into it gratefully, letting your body align with the rhythm of the dome. You dream of layered clay and drifting cold. You dream of ancient architects whispering calculations into reeds, of pots cracking open like eggs to reveal frost inside, of wind traveling through buried clay tubes with the purposefulness of monks crossing deserts. You dream that the dome speaks, not in words, not really, but in feeling. It tells you it is proud, that you have listened, that someone always must. You wake before dawn, chilled but calm, and when you exit the dome, blinking into the slowly bluing sky, you realize the pigeon is back, perched in its usual place, watching you without blinking. You nod. It nods back, probably. You've always known the desert listens, even if it answers rarely. And when it does so in odd, lopsided ways. Like a cracked jar that still holds water if tilted just right. Or like a half-forgotten proverb that only makes sense years after you first hear it. And now, as you pace around the dome with a basket of cracked clay shards gathered from old maintenance work, you feel the hush of that listening again. Except this time it doesn't come from the desert winds or the silent dunes. It comes from below, from under your feet. from the soft crunch of sand and gravel above the buried passages of a cooling system that hasn't spoken in centuries, but still remembers how. Your task today is not glamorous. No mapping airflow or testing ash streams, no deciphering frost patterns on copper sheets. Today, you're helping clean out one of the oldest qanats that feeds into the dome's subterranean base. It's barely used now, partially silted and more ceremonial than functional, but Dariush insists it still matters. A vein doesn't stop being a vein just because the blood trickles, he muttered earlier, pushing a rusted shovel into your hand and nodding toward the cracked stone entrance, half swallowed by a thorn bush. You descend slowly, each step into the narrow trench, bringing with it cooler air and older smells. Damp clay, fungal dust, the sharpness of mineral veins, and somewhere, faintly, the ghost of cold water. The tunnel itself is low, forcing you to crouch, and the walls are packed with roots from trees long dead, curling like script, etched by a distracted calligrapher. At one point, you stop and listen, convinced you hear droplets, but it's just your own breath, bouncing oddly off the curved ceiling. But the deeper you go, the more the temperature changes. Not drastically, not suddenly, just gradually less oppressive, the kind of subtle shift that doesn't announce itself, but sneaks up behind your spine and makes your skin prickle. And in that moment, your thoughts drift back to an old lesson, one of the earliest ones Dariush ever gave you. Cold isn't the absence of heat, he said, holding up a pot of half-melted snow. It's a direction, which, at the time, made absolutely no sense. But now, crawling through the cool breathe dark, beneath the dome, it clicks. The qanat isn't just a tunnel, it's a direction, a slope of temperature, a gradient designed to encourage cold to go somewhere, to be drawn, coaxed, and layered beneath the storage chamber, like a bed of buried stars. You reach a small alcove where the tunnel widens slightly, and there, nestled among pebbles and the skeleton of a lizard, is a chunk of ancient clay tile. You lift it gently. It's stamped with something, a sun, not a full one, just half, its rays stylized, flaring up from a straight line like flames licking the edge of the earth. It's a mason's mark, probably, but its position, deep within this forgotten tunnel, facing inward, makes you wonder, who placed it here? Why would a tile meant for light be buried in the direction of cold? You take it back with you, emerging from the tunnel covered in dust, hair full of grit, eyes squinting against the glare. You show it to Dariush. He studies it silently, then shrugs. Maybe they wanted the sun to know where the cold lived. Not helpful, but not untrue either. You clean the tile carefully and place it near your sleeping scrolls, where it glows faintly with absorbed warmth, a sun beneath your stories. And you begin recording theories again. Not just about airflow and evaporation, but about the beliefs behind them. The quiet, ritual logic of placing light in darkness, of assigning meaning to direction, of building cold, not through force, but through understanding. That evening, as a breeze picks up, you walk around the dome again. You walk clockwise, then counterclockwise, trying to feel a difference. The surface temperature is marginally warmer on the west side, as expected. But it's not the numbers that interest you. It's the rhythm. The walking, the pacing, the way your body starts syncing with the dome's shape, its slow pulse, its ancient patience. You begin to wonder if the builders once did this too. Not just engineers, but watchers, listeners, people who understood not just how to design cooling systems, but how to live beside them. Maybe they too walked slowly around their domes at dusk. Maybe they too crouched in tunnels, reading the air with their skin. And maybe they too left behind small symbols in forgotten places, trusting that someone, some slightly obsessed future Yakchal apprentice, would eventually come along and ask, "Why the sun? Why here?" As stars begin to blink above the horizon, and the night settles with that deep desert quiet that feels like a lid being gently lowered over the world, you lean against the dome and whisper, not expecting an answer, but you imagine one anyway. A breath through clay, a sigh from stone, a direction still open. The days slip by in the quiet way that only desert time understands. A rhythm not marked by clocks or calendars, but by the length of a shadow. The grit in your teeth after a sandstorm, the precise moment when the breeze shifts from warm breath to cool murmur just before dawn. And in this slow stretch of repetition, you begin to notice how the Yakchal doesn't merely sit in the landscape like an ancient artifact. It participates in it, absorbing, reflecting, guiding the air, and shaping the very behavior of those who live around it. Today begins with the arrival of a visitor. Not the pigeon, not Dariush, not even the lavender seller with his perpetually sneezing goat. No, this time it's an actual scholar, or at least someone pretending convincingly to be one, complete with ink-stained sleeves, a long scroll strapped to his back, and the distracted gait of someone who has memorized entire treatises, but often forgets where his sandals are. He introduces himself as Kaveh and asks, in a tone that's both respectful and slightly mischievous, whether he may speak to the dome. You consider telling him that domes don't usually answer, but instead you just nod and show him around. He walks slowly, eyes constantly squinting up at the curve of the vault, occasionally humming as if testing the acoustics, and then crouching suddenly to touch the base where condensation sometimes gathers. "It's breathing," he mutters, mostly to himself. It remembers the cold. You feel a familiar jolt of recognition. That phrase again. You lead him underground to the storage chamber, which is, at the moment, only half full. Rows of sealed jars, a few crates of salt-preserved herbs, and of course, the dwindling but stubborn pile of crushed ice that you've managed to keep alive through a particularly cruel stretch of weather. He asks many questions about airflow patterns, about thermal gradient management, about the slope of the walls and their precise compass alignment. But what surprises you most is his final question. "Where do you go when it fails?" You blink. "What do you mean?" He gestures toward the dome. "When this can no longer hold the cold, what then? What's the ritual of goodbye?" You realize, with a quiet shiver, that you've never considered this. That even though everything around you is impermanent, walls crumble, pots crack, memories blur, you've somehow never imagined the dome dying. Not really. Not the way clay collapses or roofs leak or names are forgotten. The dome, with its perfect arc and ancient logic, feels immune to time. But it isn't. Cave unrolls part of his scroll and shows you a sketch, not of a yakchal, but of a funerary urn. It has a similar dome, similar venting patterns, even a small platform beneath, much like the chamber floor. Naka? This, he says, tapping the drawing, was how some mountain villages stored ancestral ashes, deep in clay urns with vents to keep them cool. They borrowed the same design. When the last of their storage domes collapsed, they turned the technique into a shrine. You both stand in silence for a long while. That evening, after he leaves, his scroll rolled carefully away, his sandals once again mismatched. You sit beside the dome with a fresh sheet of papyrus and begin drafting your own ritual. Just in case. It feels ridiculous at first, but then soothing. You imagine a final meal shared beneath the vent, the last pot of ice melted for tea, songs whispered rather than sung, a circle drawn in ash around the base, and a final tap on the wall. 3 knocks, like a farewell. You sleep lightly that night and dream not of collapse, but of rebuilding. In your dream, the dome falls quietly, gently, like a weary elder sitting down to rest. And then hands, many hands, gather the shards, rinse them in moonlight, and begin again. Because that's the thing about cold. It's not absence, it's direction, and someone always remembers the way. You wake to the dry rasp of wind slipping past the slit of your window, dragging sand in graceful arcs along the stone path outside, and the faint scent of copper and dust. Signs that the desert is stretching its limbs again, preparing one of those days where even shadows feel like hot breath against your skin. And yet, as you step barefoot onto the cool floor of the storage chamber, there's that familiar, absurd miracle. The temperature down here remains gentle, as if the dome above is still whispering its ancient lullaby to the earth beneath, coaxing the heat to stay outside where it belongs. But today isn't about rituals or theories or visitors with mysterious scrolls. Today is repair day, because no matter how elegant a structure may seem, no matter how many centuries it has endured, the truth is, nothing remains flawless. Not even a yakchal, especially not one that has withstood both time and the slow creep of erosion from within. There's a crack, a long, spidery one, that has crept silently down the northern inner wall of the dome, no wider than a fingernail, but winding in a way that makes your gut churn. Not because it's structurally catastrophic, at least not yet, but because it disrupts the clean logic of the place. A yakchol is supposed to be curved, sealed, seamless. A perfect conversation between geometry and temperature. And now the dome has developed a lisp. Dariush arrives with a bucket of clay, 3 types of straw, and the kind of look that says, "We'll fix it. Don't panic." Which, of course, makes you panic slightly more. You start by tracing the crack with a reed dipped in water, watching as the damp line darkens and splits into smaller tributaries, revealing the fracture's reach. Then comes the cleaning, scraping away old plaster with delicate picks, brushing out powder, and blowing gently into crevices that puff dust back into your face like a dismissive sneeze. While mixing the new clay, You can't help but think of the ancient craftsmen who used this same mixture: fine sand, animal hair, and lime. You stir it slowly, clockwise, not because it matters, but because it feels like it does. And there's something oddly sacred about the way the ingredients cling to each other, transforming from dust into substance, from potential into purpose, as you press the fresh mix into the gap, smoothing it with your thumb. You remember a story Dariush once told you, that the Persians sometimes buried a sliver of silver in their repairs, not for strength, but as a symbolic offering to the spirit of the structure, a kind of architectural apology. "Sorry we let you crack," he had said, mimicking a bow. "Here's a shiny thing." You laugh and decide to do the same. Not silver, but a tiny coin you've kept since childhood. Nothing valuable, just a copper charm with a hole through the center, once worn around your neck during fever season. You press it into the fresh plaster just beneath the surface, like a whisper no one else will hear, and finish the seal. By midday, the wall looks whole again, though of course you know it isn't truly. The crack will never completely disappear. But that's the secret, isn't it? That perfection in ancient structures wasn't about flawlessness. It was about maintenance, about care, about returning again and again with clay and patience. You step back, wipe your hands on your tunic, and realize there's a quiet lesson here. That the dome, like the cold it guards, isn't static. It changes, it heals, it holds, and maybe, just maybe, so do you. You start your morning not with tea or bread or any particular sense of urgency, but with a slow descent down into the yakchal, carrying a wide clay pan in one hand and a basket of rose petals in the other. Because today isn't just about engineering or function. It's about scent, about calm, about restoring a sense of peace to a place that, while made of mud and geometry, has begun to feel like something closer to home. Yes, today is Fragrance Day. Dariush, as usual, made a face when you told him your plan. "Scent won't cool the air," he muttered, though with that reluctant twitch of a smile that says he's amused, even if he won't admit it. But he didn't stop you. And now you stand in the belly of the dome, watching light filter faintly through the skylight, catching dust motes and making them shimmer like lazy stars. Your pan is shallow and wide, glazed but chipped on one corner. You set it down carefully in the central chamber, where the stone floor stays cold even in summer, and you begin to scatter the petals. Deep pink and pale yellow, some still curled from drying, others crushed slightly from the basket's weight. They spill in slow cascades, and you trail your fingers through them absent-mindedly, remembering how your mother used to dry flowers on the courtyard roof, saying that the perfume they kept wasn't in the petals, but in the silence they absorbed. With a bit of honey water, you dampen the pile. Not enough to create mold, never that, but just enough to activate the scent. Then you sit, that's all. You sit and listen. Above the yakshal breathes. You don't mean that literally, of course, but it certainly feels that way. A gentle inhale of hot desert air through the wind catcher, funneled down into the cooling chamber, swirled and softened as it passes through internal channels, and then, somewhere, imperceptibly, it exhales again, colder, calmer. You can hear the wind drag against the dome's inner shell. a quiet whisper, like the turning of pages in a forgotten book. Historians still argue whether these moments of stillness were planned, whether the acoustics of the domes were designed to create that reverberating hush, or whether it's just the natural result of smooth clay, cold stone, and deep space. But you prefer to think it's on purpose, because a place that stores ice in the desert surely has room for deliberate silence too. Outside, children shout in the distance, and someone hammers at a stubborn beam. But in here, none of it matters. Here there is only the faint scent of rose, the cool floor beneath your legs, and the gentle, persistent rhythm of wind and shadow. Of course, not every yakchal owner would bother with this sort of ritual. Some use their domes only for storage. Ice blocks cut from mountain streams in winter and hauled down in carts, or large clay jars filled with perishable goods, or even the occasional pile of fish wrapped in lotus leaves and kept under straw mats. But in the older texts, those half-legible scrolls that Dariush keeps locked in the corner, he once read of ceremonies, of placing herbs, dried fruit, even music inside the dome, to preserve not just food, but memory. They believed, it seems, that air could remember, that cold could carry echoes. You run your hand along the dome's inner wall and imagine what it might remember from your lifetime. The first time you descended these steps, wide-eyed and unsure, holding your breath, as if the dome might judge your presence. Or the summer the windcatcher jammed and you and Dariush had to sleep inside overnight, wrapped in goat hair blankets, counting echoes instead of sheep. Even the sound of your own voice, your quiet muttering as you work, your occasional humming, might be stored here, woven into the stillness, waiting for the right gust of wind to coax it back out. You place a second clay bowl beside the first, this one filled with dried lemon peel and thyme, and let it sit. It doesn't matter if anyone else notices. The dome will. Evening arrives the way it always does in the desert. Not in a rush, not like in the cities, where shadows leap across alley walls, or street lamps flicker on with a click, but rather with the slow bending of light, the soft curling of heat back into the sand, the sky deepening from washed-out blue to a solemn, generous violet. And you, still in the shadow of the yakchal, light a small oil lamp near the entrance, not for brightness, but for ceremony, because tonight will be your last full evening here before the season turns, and the next caretaker arrives. Yes, you're leaving. Not forever, not in anger, and certainly not because the dome failed you. Quite the opposite. You have become part of its breath now, its rhythm, its memory. But your feet are restless. Your hands itch for parchment instead of plaster, and you've received a letter, rolled tight, tied with the blue cord, inviting you to join a project further east, where another desert waits, and another kind of silence calls. But before you go, there is a ritual to complete. Not a grand one, no procession, no audience, no incense. Just you and the dome, and the last of the stored ice, now shaped into a smooth, translucent sphere that fits in your palms like a gift from the gods of chill and patience. You carry it into the center chamber, where the floor still hums with the faint chill of months past, and you place the ice gently in the wide, low basin you've always reserved for this purpose. Not to keep it, but to watch it melt. Slowly, deliberately. Because sometimes preservation is not about freezing time, but about letting it go on its own terms. As the first droplets gather at the basin's edge, you light one final clay candle, its wax made with herbs pressed from this region, bitter mint, soft chamomile, a hint of fig leaf. It smells like everything you've done here, in the softest way. And in that moment, with the melting ice before you and the flame flickering gently against the inner dome's curve, you feel the weight of quiet accomplishments settle in your chest like a warm stone. You do a final check. Air vents, clear, storage jars, sealed, structural seams, holding the hidden copper coin in the repaired crack, still pressed snugly beneath its coat of plaster, like a secret between friends. You take one slow walk around the interior, running your fingers along the wall's curves as you go. You whisper your gratitude, not aloud, not even consciously formed into words, but in the soft pattern of your footsteps, in the way you pause before exiting, in the gentle pull of your breath through your nose. You leave notes for the next caretaker, of course. Scribbled diagrams, peculiar warnings, a list of which herbs fare best beside cooling jars, and which insects to chase out with vinegar-soaked cloths. But the real inheritance is this: the air, the stillness, the way light falls just so at mid-morning. When you step outside for the last time, you leave the door slightly ajar. Not as a mistake, not because you forgot, but because this place, more than anything, is about flow, and now it flows forward without you. So as the sun dips below the jagged hills and the dome disappears into the warm blur of twilight, you find yourself moving more slowly, as if the desert itself is coaxing you toward stillness, toward a kind of deliberate fading that feels less like an ending and more like an exhale after a very long sentence. The heat of the day has softened, the wind has grown kinder, and the earth underneath your feet feels somehow gentler, as if even the stones have learned to rest. You imagine the yakchal behind you continuing its ancient, tireless work, not with drama, not with sound, but with the kind of quiet competence that has made it a miracle for centuries. Its walls will cool the next visitor. Its breath will steady another heartbeat. Its cold will hold, and maybe, just maybe, it will remember you. Because places do that, don't they? They remember hands, footsteps, intentions, the soft brushing of fingertips against clay, the way laughter echoes when it's rare, the way silence stretches when it's allowed to linger. You let your eyes close for a moment, and in that hush, you feel not just rested, but witnessed. As though every action you took inside that dome, no matter how small, was folded gently into its memory, tucked beside years of other quiet efforts. Ice fetched, cracks sealed, herbs dried, petals scattered. And now as your breathing slows and your body settles deeper into whatever comfort surrounds you, pillows, perhaps, or a soft mat, or simply the cool idea of a dome curved perfectly over your imagination, you allow yourself to drift, not away, but inward, into the gentle geometry of calm, into the rhythm of something ancient and kind, because even though you're not there anymore, the cold remains, the dome remains, And somewhere, beneath the desert stars, silence is still being shaped by clay.